Welcome to Multicultural Family Hub. I'm Chessie.
I'm Andre.
And today we have a guest, and we are so excited. We're going to let her introduce herself.
Hi, my name is Dr. Ashley Rodriguez. I'm a licensed psychologist and founder of Pathbreak Coaching and Consulting. In my private practice, I specialize in perinatal mental health, supporting families through pregnancy and postpartum.
Awesome. We're so excited to have you here. So many questions, so many places we can go. We're gonna try to keep it in a container, but we know we're gonna let it spill out. So let's just go for it and see where we get to. I know for me, when I came across your work, whether it's through your blog, or your website, or podcast you've been on, the thing that really stood out to me, the first thing that stood out to me is kind of your specific focus on like that first generational mental health. And mental health, we hear that term all the time everywhere. But it was that piece about like first generation space mental health. So I just want to start off with you, maybe tell me a little bit more about that, your experience with it, and why that first generation before mental health part.
For me, it's just my personal experience.
Mhm.
So I'm the first one to go away to college. My sister did go to college, but I was the first one to go out of state, the first one to get my doctorate in my family. And with all of those first came both a lot of support. My family really rallied behind me and a lot of unknowns. And there was a lot that I had to figure out and learn on my own. And there was just a different pressure there that I feel I've seen time and time again working with first gens. There's this, you want to give back to the community, you want to give back to your family has sacrificed so much, and you're navigating systems that are not built for you, that are not necessarily set up to support you. And so having to be fully yourself in a space that doesn't always welcome that is really challenging. And it's just fulfilling to support people in being more authentically themselves, to help them understand it's not them, it's the system, and helping them just feel more confident in themselves.
What are some of the ways that you yourself develop strategies or that you empower your clients as they're going through it, coming up against those roadblocks, being like, whoa, this isn't meant for me. I don't feel comfortable here. Like, what are some ways that you do?
For me, self-validation is so important. I think a lot of times when you don't necessarily have the community, or you just experience invalidation, sometimes unintentionally, sometimes intentionally, being able to tell yourself, I feel this way because of this situation, and helping yourself not invalidate yourself is really important. And then also community. I think it's so important to find spaces where you can be yourself, where you can get support, where you can support others and have that reciprocal relationship. So I'm very communal, and I've always found those spaces, those pockets, wherever I've been, really, where I can just voice the things that sometimes people are thinking, but maybe are like, keeping to themselves.
Where did you find that specifically in your journey, community? I feel like that in this moment in time where there are more digital spaces and people are feeling more isolated, like where are you finding community where you feel like you can show up as your whole self? Or in the past?
So for me, I think I've always been a little outspoken, and typically what has happened is I'll be in a space and I will say something that maybe, usually I am hesitant to share it. And I have this internal dialogue and I end up saying, no, I'm going to say it. And I'll have that moment. And then somebody will approach me and say, I'm so glad you said that. That's actually how I found a lot of community. People who have been like, I was thinking that, but I wasn't going to say it. Thank you so much for saying that. And then we've built a relationship from there.
Beautiful.
I have a question for you, because I know I've experienced this in my life. When you, let's say, entered first into higher education or other spaces that, maybe you were the first in or the first of your family or generation, did you feel that like it wasn't just Ashley there? It was like you were there, your body was there, but it was like all of you, all your history, your family, everyone was coming along.
Right.
And so you're in that space as Andre or Ashley, but not fully Andre. It's like there's all the other people also in the room. And so did you ever experience that in terms of your journey?
Absolutely. And I think part of it is that I know I'm not doing this just for me. I know my lineage didn't have the same opportunities that I did. And I know that they're always with me. So sometimes when I feel overwhelmed, I imagine them behind me. I imagine them like supporting me or backing me up. And I know that I represent a lot in spaces too, that people see me and they see my history and they see what they imagine my family has experienced. So it's both what I imagine, but also what people see when they look at me in these spaces.
Awesome.
Does that ever feel heavy in terms of, because I can see it being two things at the same time, where it's like you have this like beautiful lineage kind of pushing you forward, but also the expectations of that lineage and maybe some of those expectations not being things that you want to bring forward. And like, how have you like balanced those two things, or maybe teased out those two things?
It can be heavy. And I think sometimes for me, when I'm having that internal dialogue, which I do a lot, should I say this? Should I do that? I try to remind myself like what is aligned with my values. And so I use the concept of the acceptance and commitments therapy choice point, where essentially the idea is you have a situation and thoughts and feelings come up, and you can take one action that would take you far away from the person you want to be, far away from the life you want to live. You could take another action that makes you closer to the person you want to be, closer to the life you want to live. And so when I'm having that debate, a lot of times I picture that sort of like fork at the road. Which way do I want to go? Which way makes sense for me? I think also sometimes you have to pick and choose your battles. And so when I feel I'm not at capacity, I also remind myself and try my best to practice self-compassion of, I also don't always have to be the one. I don't have to always be the teacher. I don't have to be the only person that does this work. This is collective work. So also keeping that in mind too.
Yeah.
I picture like a battery on like on your computer or your phone with like where like kind of checking your battery level, and you're like, okay, if I'm like at 80 and above, then I go to the fork. But if it's below 70 or 80, we just gotta hang. Would you say that's like
Exactly. Below that is we're taking care of ourselves right now, and that's enough.
You know, you talked about that visualization of like going away or closer to what your value is. And when it comes to, you know, do a lot of our work with multicultural families, or when it comes to someone that's, you know, identified as the first generation, what happens, or have you had experience with, what if it's your culture or your inherited culture that might at times take you or try or draw you away from who you really are? How do you, when you work with people or when you work with first generation folks, help them navigate that pull that could pull them away versus staying in line with who they are? And I know you do a lot of work with like life transitions and identity exploration. So help tease that out for me.
I see that a lot. And part of it is thinking about this role that you play in your family. Is this a role that speaks to you, or is this a role that was given to you? A lot of times we all have different gifts. And so depending on the gifts you have, sometimes you're sort of put in a box in your family. And in a family unit, we're all emotionally connected. And so if you are the person that people typically go to, but then what happens when you need support? Or when you need help? I think also thinking about going back to values, I like to break it down into what are the family's values, what's the community's values, what are your personal values? Because sometimes we take on these values that were taught to us, but that actually aren't our own or
Mm.
aren't always going to help us be the person we want to be. And so thinking about how has that helped you? How has that served you up until now? And now, in this point in life, when you're working on X goals, how can we learn to balance that or challenge that when it isn't serving you anymore?
Mm. Do you think that's a process that takes a lot of practice and maybe a lot of years? And if so, like real short, like quick, what's that process look like? If you're working with me from day one and you come in and you could tell that I've got all my values all mixed up. I got some that are mine, some that I got from YouTube, some that are right. What would be the first step in you helping me first determine which ones are which? Especially as someone that comes from multiple cultures. Like
Yeah.
there's a lot of different, and sometimes they're competing
Yeah.
values going on.
Absolutely. I think starting with a genogram
Ooh.
helps map things out. So a genogram is a fancy way of saying a family tree. That's all that it is.
I was like, I
And
gotta look that one up.
yeah, no. It's a family tree. Hopefully,
Okay.
if you know up to 3 generations, that's helpful to sort of get patterns. But I also know sometimes you don't have that history, and that's okay too. But what I like to do when mapping out the family is really thinking about the different cultural patterns too. So for some of us, if your grandmother is the one that came here, what were the conditions that made them come here? What was the reason? And then thinking about how they figured out or determines like what values they're going to keep from their home country, and then what are they going to take from being here, and what are the family patterns. Also looking at the relationships, so looking at the reputation of different family members. Sometimes the family member that does their own thing has a reputation of being the wild child or being the black sheep, or and when you're starting to do your own work, you then realize like actually that person's just a little more individuated, and maybe that was threatening to the family. So thinking about that, and as I'm mapping out the family patterns, typically the client starts having their own aha moments of, oh, I never thought about, this person's reputation in that way. And I actually am sort of like them. And maybe I was nervous to make decisions that would be similar to that person because of the reputation they have or whatever it is.
That's so interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, so you help guide them in thinking about all of those family narratives that we've heard so many times. And so you internalize it if you don't take time to think about it and reflect.
Yeah, and I know for me, one of the things that I've been working on, and this is why I love stories so much, and it sounds like even what you're saying, once I've done that work, now I have a story, and stories have different characters, and they have beginning, and they have all these things. And for me, it allows me to then, I guess, depersonalize. Like instead of being like, Andre is the black sheep, it's like, there's a different story there that's like, oh, that's not necessarily just him. It's like, there's a role that he has played, and I'm able to see that role and even maybe honor that role and see some of myself reflected in it. So I like that when you walking us through that, because it creates this overarching story that also starts before me and will continue after me.
Right.
So it's not just like Ashley and I. It's like, no, there's a whole line here.
I think the piece that fascinates me is it's like not even like, yes, it's stories about myself, but stories about my family members that I'm like, oh, as someone that would be like a recovering people pleaser, that I'm like, oh, I'm not gonna do that. I saw. Yeah, so I love that it is also not just about my individual story, about stories I've been told, but I'm looking at other people in the family and saying, ooh, my brother did that as a child. My brother did that, and that's how he was labeled. So I'm not going to do that, even though that might be authentic to me because it doesn't fit within the family narrative. I think that tree is so fascinating, especially when you're blending cultures and stories and pulling out not just like what was my story in the family, but what were all the stories and how did they play together? I think that's such a cool holistic view that I've never heard before. Thanks for sharing that.
Absolutely. It's been a game changer starting therapy in that way because I've always thought of people as part of something. I've always thought like in that systems kind of
Yeah.
lens, and doing it with the family, so much comes out.
Oof. I'm already thinking like, oh my gosh. all,
Yeah.
all the
And
stories.
it's interesting though, when you gave me that visual of the tree, I think about the tree, I think about all the branches, and I do think about in our life, we, you know, we can be, we might be one branch, but then we start off and we branch off. An example of my life is like, it's like when I became a dad, I entered a totally different branch, but in doing that, I transitioned into fatherhood, but also in doing that, then you are now at a different role.
Right.
And I know one of the things that you work with is like boundaries. And
Yes.
and I think that ties to life because usually like when we transition out of a role in a new role, there's this moment where there's tension because now you're not just Andre's son, you're Andre's son, husband, dad. And so I really wanted to spend some time with boundaries regarding when we transition and do a life transition, and then there's something new that might go with our culture or it might go against our family culture. Walk me through that.
With life transitions, there's such a richness in that work because so much comes up. You know, we are sometimes in a position where it's almost like a death of an old self. And so then you're becoming this new self, but you don't know that person yet. And
Mm.
that can be really scary. And specifically with parenting, so much comes up because also your own childhood experiences come up naturally when you're
Mm.
transitioning into parenting and thinking about what kind of parent you want to be and what was modeled for you. So there's a lot of soul searching and there's a lot of identity work during that time of how do I want to show up in this new role? What does it mean to me, this new role? Because I can look and say, you know, being a mother or being a father means this, but somebody might put a completely different meaning to it. So the importance of the narrative of what were the circumstances around this life transition? Was this something that was chosen or forced on us? What do we imagine? What are our expectations? And then really thinking about and what is most important to us right now, because there's so much that's in flux in a transition.
Think that is so, just that pause is so, so helpful. It's not a pause that I took and I think could be take years off of a journey in my own journey of not examining it and being like, oh, this is what it means to be a mother because this is what I was handed and this is what it means to be a good mother because that's the way that mine did it or because that's the way that I have seen it in my family versus, oh, does that align with me? Is being a mom like this one of my values? And I think that is like such important work in the middle of that transition where it feels so chaotic. And I feel like for me, motherhood was the moment that I recognized that the tools that I had broke down so deeply because I was like, oh, and this was on after we had twins because I felt like I was still kind of hanging on with one, but after we had twins, it really blew up. And I was like,
Mm.
oh, I do not have the tools that I want to have. I don't have the nervous system that I want to have to handle conflict in a values aligned way. And I feel like that was where my journey really began. And the tools that you're offering are so valuable because you can kind of walk it back. Like you don't have to be in the middle of like the before you can be a little proactive. So I love that framing. And do you feel like you get a lot of clients that are in the middle of it that are like have like entered the breakdown and are like, uh-oh.
Oh
Too,
yeah.
too fast.
Oh yeah. I get the clients that are proactive and they're anticipating challenge and so we get to slow down before we get there. And then I also get the clients that are like, especially with the parenting work, I see a lot of really high achieving perfectionist moms and sometimes parenting just doesn't come as natural. The bonding maybe doesn't come as natural or whatever the stressor is. And then they come to me and they're like, I don't know what's going on. I don't know who I am anymore. And I need help. Those are the two camps that I see the most in my practice.
That tracks. What are some of your, as the person that would have come to you in the middle of it, being like, oh my, what are some of your favorite tools to offer people that are like in the trenches, that are like fully dysregulated, that are like, I am in crisis?
Part of it is just having that holding space and having the time to reflect and to be with yourself in the session. I also really like to practice dialectics, which is the idea that two opposite things can be true at the same time. So I'm doing the best I can and I need to do better. Having that kind of, because so often with parenting, there's so much judgment and there's so much shame, and society doesn't talk about when it doesn't go as smooth. And so a lot of the parents I work with are like, this is not like the movies. What is going on? What is happening? And so there has to be that validation piece. And when we use but, we often unintentionally invalidate ourselves because we'll say something, but, and then the second part has like more weight somehow.
Oh, versus and.
Versus and.
Oh, I love that. And that's a big dialectics. The older I get, the more my mantra is two things are always true at the same time.
Yeah, we live in the gray, you know,
Yes.
the gray, we have to acknowledge the gray. When we're so focused in that black and white thinking is when we tend to hurt ourselves psychologically.
Wow, say more about that. That black and white thinking.
The black and white thinking. Yeah, I think that's where I see the self-criticism really come up. That's when I see a lot of the, you know, I should be this way. I why am I not this way? And that's when a lot of clients, I think, lose themselves because one, they're comparing themselves often to something that maybe is not even attainable, to be honest. And they're focused on outside factors instead of looking within themselves. So being in the gray, it allows us to, one, have compassion and have grace for ourselves, and to also be authentically ourselves, and to know that life is messy, life is chaotic. It's not this neat, you know, situation. Things are challenging, but the point of therapy the point of therapy is to be able to embrace that and to catch yourself when you're like I just did, and knowing that healing is not linear, that just because you had a rough day or a rough interaction doesn't take away from all the work you've been doing.
I need to hear that today.
You just said something. I just want to repeat this for a minute out there. You said being in the gray allows us to have not just compassion for ourselves, but for compassion for others. That's huge. A big motivator to stay out of the black and white, to stay out of the binary and be in the gray and be okay with that. How, I know another part of your work is with emotional regulation. How does that black and white that we often come to folks like you with, or we live in as parents, or we live in as multicultural folks or multicultural families, how does that black and white impact our emotional regulation, our nervous system, based on what you've seen?
What I see with the black and white thinking, it often has this narrative that something should or should not be happening. And so when we're thinking about our feelings, if somebody is thinking in a black and white way, oftentimes they're suppressing, avoiding the feelings that are actually coming up because they feel they should be feeling another way. And when we do that, and because also toxic positivity is so popular now. And there's this idea you're always supposed to be positive, which is not realistic and is not human. So the more that we do that sort of black and white, I should be this way, I things are supposed to be this way, we're avoiding feeling the actual feeling that's coming up. And by doing that, we're also not getting the message the feeling is meant to give us.
Ooh.
Feelings are communicators. They're telling us what's important to us, what we're missing, what we want more of. And so even some of those feelings that typically a lot of us think of as negative, like maybe jealousy, actually is telling us or indicating to us that we would want more of that. And what would it be like to think of it in that way instead of, I shouldn't feel this way? There's such a difference. And so I think instead of that judgmental and critical and everything is neat, you know, in a box kind of thinking, we're able to say, I can feel multiple things at once. And they're all because different parts of us are being triggered, or different parts of us are coming up and trying to show us something that's important to us. Then we're able to get what we need, or hopefully we are more able to get what we need, or we get the message that we need from that moment, and then we can process it. When you don't give your feelings the space that they need, they continue to come up. So it's just undigested, and it finds ways to keep creeping up through the surface.
What if I grew up in a culture that, I mean, what if I grew up in a culture where it's like, we don't process feelings, we don't talk about feelings.
Feelings are bad.
You can be mad, and that's it. Like, and what if I grew up, what if I aged up in that, and I never ever saw anybody allow or process the range of emotions? How would that, in your work, how is that then going to impact my ability to connect relationally, whether it be with partner, kids, community members, co-workers? Because we're like what does that do if me when I all that undigested stuff? Because I love that visual, because I know what that feels like.
Yeah, so relationally, what I see is then that person that can't hold space for feelings as they come up, they have to avoid conflict, or they escalate conflict in a way that makes it hard to really come to a solution. So it bleeds into relationships and makes it hard to repair when rupture happens. And it's naturally going to happen because two people aren't always going to be aligned. So it makes it hard to have a relationship when you can't hold space alone for your own feelings. And then you see somebody else having feelings, and that can be very triggering.
I think this tracks so much, especially in multicultural relationships, because conflict is the nature, because you are blending two cultures that don't have the same expectations. And those tools are so important to be able to feel and move through it, because otherwise it is just a constant, like we're not going to get anywhere in coming to a resolution. I had not thought about, like, even walking it back one step before the conflict is like we can't get to a place of resolution because our feelings are just like either squashed or scooched to the side.
Right. So a lot of my work, again, because I'm thinking of it as a family, even if I'm just working with the individual, is helping them think about how can we track these interactions. And what I like to do, which comes from the Ackerman relational model, which is a model of family therapy, is basically track what happened, what were you thinking, what do you imagine the other person is thinking and feeling? What did they do? What were you thinking? What were you feeling? What do you imagine they were feeling? Right? So really trying to help with that perspective taking. And if you work with, like, let's say a couple and you have both of them do it, I guarantee you they won't be the same. Because the perceptions they have, the attributions they have are going to be different because of their own lived experiences and their own worldviews.
I That
So it puts us back in the gray.
It puts us back in the gray, and it
I
helps us
can't be
then
a
pause.
yeah,
Yeah,
because but you based on what you just said, it's like once I accept that, I'm like, well, obviously my view of this can't be 100% true. Because if it was, then you would have said the same thing, but what you're saying is different. So, oh, I don't have to hold that as a truth with a capital
as an
T.
absolute. Yeah,
And set that down. And then Andre can open to show up and be receptive and shift and adjust and be okay with the gray. Yeah.
exactly. And hopefully by tracking it from beginning to end, right? Like, then did it escalate, or did somebody have to leave, which sometimes happens in conflicts, like it becomes unbearable, they had to leave. What do you imagine you were feeling, or they were feeling, you were feeling? Now we've tracked the whole interaction. Now we're able to see patterns as well of, then where does it get to the point that you have to disconnect, or that you feel you have to prove your point, or whatever the situation is.
Oh, that's so interesting. Like where does it come to a head where you're like not moving forward?
Right.
I feel like for me, it's almost always shame, where I'm like, I did something wrong. What I'm thinking is like, Andre's mad at me. Whatever it is so and so's mad at me. I did something wrong. I gotta fix it. And so like, not feeling all the feelings, but projecting what someone else is feeling in the conflict, and rather than sitting with the emotion of what, like, whatever it is, and maybe it's not a whole lot. I think my reaction is usually bigger to like, oh, what is that other person feeling, and versus tuning in here first. I think there's such valuable tools.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and I think about I think about a friend I had who came from a culture where you didn't express emotions, and his partner came from a culture where it's like you didn't go to sleep until it was done.
Okay.
And a lot of their attention wasn't necessarily about the thing that happened. It was like I like one was coming from a culture like we got to talk about, we got to get this done. It's 12 o'clock at night, and one was coming from a culture was like we just go to sleep and then we wake up and we move on. And
Mm.
it's not until each of us track, like you said, walk that story back of why am I approaching it like this? Why are you approaching it like this? That we can really kind of get to the root of like, how do we heal this thing? How do we step out of that black and white of we're not going to talk about it, or we're not going to bed till we talk about it, and really the space. It's almost like you can't have space for healing. You can't have space for conflict resolution if we're all over here.
Right. And so the idea with the tracking over time, after you've tracked multiple interactions, the therapist also is able to see, okay, what are this partner's vulnerabilities and survival strategies, and what are this partner's vulnerabilities and survival strategies? And then we're able to see, okay, that's where the vulnerability got triggered. That's when that person used their survival strategy. And that's when we got back into the same pattern that has brought them into couples therapy or family therapy.
Survival strategy.
Yeah.
Tell me more.
Yeah. So I think it's how the person reacts, and it's how they've learned to take care of themselves. So, for example, the friend that you're saying that like we're gonna talk about it until it's done, their survival strategy might be like, we need to air it out. I need to know where I stand. Maybe it's part of it. I need to know that we can move on. Whereas the other person is like, survival strategy is avoidance. We make pretend it didn't happen. We sweep it under the rug. Tomorrow's a new day. So when we're mapping it out, those survival strategies are not aligned. So now, how do we help this couple come up with a way to manage conflict that's natural and repair from a situation, keeping in mind their survival strategies are complete opposite from the other feeling like this is now resolved?
That's so beautiful. And I think about, at least in my personal journey, there have been survival strategies that I have displayed that I never even chose. It's like they came down through the generational lineage. They came into they're in my nervous system, and I acted them out. Not I acted them out and associated with them as me, my personality, but realizing like, oh, this isn't new. Like my so and so and so and so and so and so use the same strategy to protect or to avoid or to what it may be. And I think this leads me into you do work, and this is one of the things that really stood out for me was like your work with healing from intergenerational trauma.
Mhm.
And talk a little bit about that piece, intergenerational trauma. We're all familiar with big trauma, big T trauma, little T trauma, but like what is it about like that intergenerational aspect of it that is unique?
Yeah, I think the one, in a lot of ways, it's going back to it's undigested. So it's passed down from one generation to the next. So the simplest way that I can define it is unresolved pain, trauma, strategies that were passed down from one generation to the next. And for that original generation, that is what kept them safe. That is what, so when we're thinking about those of us that have ancestors that were enslaved or that have ancestors that were colonized or whatever the atrocious thing was, there were ways that they adapted to keep themselves safe. And that was a survival strategy at that time. And now it is not the same situation, but we were modeled those behaviors or we were taught those narratives and we've heard those stories time and time again. We've internalized it without thinking about, is this helping or hurting me? And it's not that simple too. It's just, is it helping or hurting? Is it helping or hurting in this situation?
Yeah.
In this circumstance? So in working with, and what I do mostly with intergenerational trauma is that parent-child's work, that dyadic work. It's really thinking about, so you have all of these strategies that have been taught to you or that even you just saw them and so it became normalized. And how do you want to parent this child? A lot of the families I see, they want to break these curses and they don't know how to do that. And so the work is really thinking about, can we put these behaviors into context? Not blaming or shaming. Can we sort of get a sense of why this may have been the norm for the family and what do you want the norm to be for your new family?
On this, I love that. I was gonna say on that train, this sounds like the people coming to you, not in crisis, in planning mode.
Right.
Because for me, I found in crisis, I couldn't respond from where I wanted to, because you are default in the pattern that you are given, and your default goes back to the tool that you know don't want to be implementing. But on a proactive level with the people that are coming to you, like, hey, we recognize these patterns. How do we break them? What are some proactive strategies? So when the behavior comes up in your kid, because it will, like, I want to be ready to respond to it from a conscious place that we're choosing versus like, whoa, I'm back here where I don't want to be.
Back in survival strategy.
Right. What you're saying is when you're in survival mode, you don't have space to be reflective. You go into default, and that is entirely true. And so the idea is before we get there, if we can start, and this is why I love working with people in pregnancy, before a baby is here, as you're anticipating what baby may be like, which you can never get it right. You don't know how baby will be, but you will have those anticipations, right? Yeah. So the more in touch that parent can be with their childhood experiences emotionally, the research has shown the less likely they will be to repeat cycles.
Ooh, what does that mean? Like how would a parent become in touch with that childhood experience emotionally?
So there's this concept called ghosts in the nursery.
Ghost in the nursery?
Ghosts in the nursery. Okay. And it's a very old concept in psychology. And the idea is all of those unresolved childhood experiences. So maybe your mom not consistently responding to you when you cry, all of those, unheard, unresponded cries. become triggered when you hear your baby cry if you aren't in touch with it. And so a baby in a lot of ways is very easy to project onto because the baby doesn't talk. The baby, well, they do talk in their own ways, but we don't know the language, right? They have their own cries. But if you aren't in tune with your own childhood experiences, it's very easy to project onto a baby. And so that kind of therapy starts with a really extensive assessment of your own upbringing, of your own trauma history. And what we see are the parents that, you know, will downplay or minimize a lot of the experience. And I've seen it, like parents will say the most horrendous things they experience, but they will say like really monotone or very like matter of fact. That's when I'm like, okay, we're in for it, because there is no emotional connection to it, as opposed to a parent who is able to, you know, show that reaction. Maybe they've done work on it, so maybe it's not that they are as triggered as they would be, but that they're able to connect to the feeling of that experience. Those are the moms that have more awareness.
Interesting.
Then when they're in the situations with their child, they're able to hopefully take a beat and think about what may be happening for my child. As opposed to the other side is you're so in your own experience, you can't take that beat. We call that reflective functioning. You can't think about what this baby, what this child is potentially experiencing.
Yeah. And I think it could be a baby, it could be a child, it could be a 7-year-old, it could be a teen.
It could be a teen, yeah, it could be an adult. Yeah.
Wow, you said so much. You know, one of the things you said was being able to, you know, you're talking to someone, they're telling you about their life experience, but they're telling you in this way that's like, gives this impression of calmness or monotone, which I think culture would say, oh, that looks like that person's obviously okay. Look, they're talking about this terrible thing, and look how composed Andre is. And I've had this experience in my life of, you know, before I went on my journey, and before I started doing my work, and before I entered therapy, is like telling someone something about something that's traumatic in a way with a smile on my face, and having them start crying. And it was actually those moments that really made me go, I have some work to do, because I was able to see in real time, like the thing was unfortunate and traumatic. And I was able to see another person's reaction and realize like I wasn't feeling that in my body. There wasn't any emotion to it. It was like I was telling a story that I read in a book. And now that I'm in the process, and now that I am in therapy, I'm also able to recognize, oh, yeah, that like you said, healing that, revisiting that childhood and doing that emotional healing allows me to show up very different and very in an emotional way with my kids, because I didn't have that capacity. I had disconnected from it. So what you're saying resonates with me deeply. But sometimes you have to have those moments where like someone like you is looking at you, and you're able to look at them and go, oh yeah, my response to this isn't it's different.
And I think about emotions being in the body. And that was always a challenge for me, was I would want to respond in my head in a certain way, where that was reflective and like, okay, this is where I want to come from, but my body was like already gone. Like I was already I was already triggered. I was already like out of my mouth and in my body, before my mind could be like, oh, it's okay, that's not how I want to respond, they're fine, this is their job as a 2-year-old. And right, all of the rational thoughts that I had come up with in a calm space, like my body responded before my mind could get to where it would be. And is that something you have seen commonly, and like tools to do that kind of like the emotional work of feeling and of connecting?
Yeah, I see that a lot. And the patients I work with, your alarm bells for danger and for safety go off depending on some of your experiences. So part of that assessment phase of getting a sense of all the things you've been through is for me to start thinking about, when do you feel unsafe? When do you feel you have to go offline, so to speak?
Mm.
And then thinking about, how do you naturally express feelings? Because I know I mentioned body language, but sometimes clients will look like they are composed, and in some ways their culture may have valued that, right? Like that you look composed, but
100%.
internally they're going through it, and I wouldn't know unless I check in and say what's coming up for you in your body. And
Yeah.
so also thinking about, what is this person's, in some ways, like their baseline, what is them triggered, and then what helps them feel safe in the body.
Yeah, and that's really, I think that question, like in the body, because I know for me, I can answer that very different than if someone asked me like, what are you thinking? I have but if you're like, what's in here? I feel like I can pull from vocabulary to describe that. Versus up here, I could intellectualize it, or I could give you an answer that, I mean, it's not. It's like cut off at the head, at the neck, and kind of stay outside of the conversation and not really bring in the real feelings. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And so depending on the dyad, sometimes the work looks like starting with body work. Sometimes it's like, let's say for what I see sometimes is, maybe I have a really active kiddo. A kiddo that, like, they have to move their body. They have to. And this idea of we're going to sit and we're going to play is not going to work for this kid. So how do we do some body movement to get that energy out, so that then we can play? It's the same for an adult, but I think sometimes it's not as normalized for an adult. Of what do you need to do? Do you need to shake it off? Do you need to dance? Whatever it is, to get that feeling out.
Yeah, I think that's been interesting. I know Chessie and I have gone through, both are going through this. I've gone through this using different modalities. For me, it's yoga and movement, and for you, it's dance.
Yeah.
It's specifically salsa dancing. Having to get in touch with the body and get the body involved in the process, so that then we can really bring up and tap into what's really deep in there. Yeah. One of the things I feel like I'm catching in what you're saying is, as a parent, it's almost like when people talk about why, like, why do this hard work? Why reflect? Why seek help? Why, because we know it's going to be hard. We know it's going to be uncomfortable. But what I'm hearing you saying in terms of intergenerational healing is, it's almost like by doing this, by revisiting that past, by kind of getting back in touch with those emotions, you end up essentially healing forward, or you end up stopping the transition of the traumas, of the wounds, of the samskaras to the ones that you love the most, your children.
And there's a healing that happens for you as well when you revisit those experiences and you take the time to say, when I was a child and this happened, that was not right. And I did whatever I had to do to protect myself in that moment. And I'm not going to let that happen again. Because it happened to me doesn't mean it needs to continue.
Why? I come from a culture where you don't say it out loud. So why is it important, like you said, like when we say, like, why is that? Why can't I just, like, on my own over here, acknowledge it and be like, okay, I'm good, let's go get a coffee. Like, because, like, essentially, when I think about, if you come from a culture that's maybe rooted in, like, the Black South, there's things that you don't say out loud, and you don't share. You definitely don't share. So why is that an important piece, the speaking of it?
There's a power to naming. By naming it, it helps take away some of the shame. Because when we hold on to it, or we just think it, there's still those thoughts of, like, was I at fault? Or there might still be, like, some of that dialogue. when you name it, I think one, in some ways for a family, it's really threatening to name things.
Okay.
And I think that's why there's that narrative of you don't tell people the things that happen in the family. I grew up with that narrative too.
Okay.
Even with family members being in the mental health fields, there was still this narrative of you don't talk about the things that happen in this family. But when you don't talk about it, it goes unquestioned and it goes, again, undigested. But when you name it, you're able to, one, look at it a little more from a distance and able to really tease apart people's roles, people's contributions, and what happens. And the other power of narrative work, going back to what you were saying earlier too with storytelling, is the more you tell a story, it changes every time. So the more you tell a story, you're able to work through and think about and question and reprocess something. From the first time you said it to, let's say, the 10th time you said it, I imagine there's going to be less self-criticism. It's going to be less defensiveness and more of an openness of this was the experience.
Man,
Got it.
everything you're saying, I'm just like, oh, I'm just gonna talk to you for 3 more hours. But one of the things for my family in terms of naming is like, I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. Like one of the values is like, we are nice and we don't hurt people's feelings. And so maybe less of the like, we don't talk about our business, but like, I'm not going to tell you that you hurt me because that's not nice. And you were good to me. So if I say that like, wow, that was hurtful and that didn't work, that means that I am bad. Or like you are telling me I did a bad job, that I'm a bad parent. And so it's my job to protect my parents' emotions. Like in that kind of a family situation or culture, like how would you like what is the benefit of saying the thing out loud?
Part of it is thinking about the roles that people play, because what I'm hearing is you're protecting your parents.
Yeah.
And you are an adult now, right? Yes.
Yeah.
However,
By the way.
however, you aren't responsible for your parents' feelings or your parents' reactions. And so I work with a lot of people that think in that way because the family has made it so. That's the family norm. We take care of each other and we think of each other. And then that leaves less space for thinking of yourself, which in that kind of family system would be seen as selfish.
Right. Yeah.
However, when things go unnamed, they go unchallenged. So now nobody is taking accountability. Nobody is able to improve because we haven't had a conversation about how that landed. It's a difference between intent and impact. So maybe they didn't mean to hurt you, and that can be part of the feedback. And it did. It hit something in you. It landed in a way that hurt a part of you. And so when thinking about healthy relationships, there is a need for reciprocity, a need for give and take. And in relationships where it's normalized that we give feedback, we give the other person an opportunity to also get better, to also be better in relation with us. When we keep everything to ourselves, there's no chance for them to know how they came off. And so then things will always just stay the same. So part of what I challenge with people in giving feedback is if this is a relationship that's important to you, and this sounds like it's an important relationship, how can we give feedback in a way, sandwich it, right? So we can hopefully have them hear you. Although even if they don't hear you, that's not your responsibility again, but we'll put it in a way that hopefully they can hear you. And how do you also increase the chances of you getting your wants and needs met in this relationship?
Wow. Oh man.
That's huge.
Yeah. I mean, that's a whole nother podcast, and it's great. And thank you for sharing that. I think there's a lot for us to think about. There's one other really important piece of I think is important to your work that I want to touch on in the time we have left, and that's your perinatal and postpartum emotional wellness. And I just feel like that is I just want to hear a little bit more. I'm sure the people listening to this and parents listening to this, and specifically women and mothers listening to this, tell us a little bit more about that work that you do.
What the research shows is the earlier we intervene, the better the impact for both parent and baby, or for the whole family. Because also, again, if a mom is struggling or a dad is struggling, it's going to impact also the couple's relationship. So that impacts the whole family. And what I love about it is that there's just so much that comes up in pregnancy and postpartum. What kind of parent do I want to be? What kind of family do I want to have? There's so many questions and there's no guide. There's no like perfect manual of how to raise this child. That's because every child is different. So it's work that in some ways feels really healing to me, and thinking about my own maternal lineage. I am not a mom. I'm an aunt of 9, which is not the same. I get to give them back, and I know the responsibility is different. But thinking about all of the moms in my lineage, I come from a long line of caregivers, a long line of people who sacrificed a lot to take care of others. And so working with these moms, typically moms, to be able to set better boundaries, to really think about what they want to need in their romantic relationship and their relationship with their child. There's also like a reciprocal, I feel, effect on my own maternal lineage in some ways of, and we're also working on getting our wants and needs met too. And I'm modeling that. And a lot of my family members have been listening to some of the podcasts I've been doing and reaching out and giving, positive feedback too, which I didn't necessarily recognize, but it's so nice to sort of see that ripple effect. So it's been beautiful. And in a lot of ways, I also get to see then this family really flourish in ways that they couldn't have imagined earlier by doing this work earlier on.
Wow.
Do you see in this work, in my experience with motherhood, it's like my expectations for what was going to happen and what my children were going to be like versus reality were vastly different. What are some of the ways that once kids come and moms are like, whoa, I had like planned to be like this, but it was actually like this. What are some of the ways in that some of the perinatal and postpartum that that work impacts the disconnect when things don't line up?
There's a need to talk about the expectations and unpack the expectations and where do we think they come from? Because I work with, again, a lot of high achieving, parents that thought this would be just like anything else, like natural and easy. And then you have this baby that has their own wants and needs, this baby that's separate from you and also so part of you and so connected to you. And so part of it is doing that sort of unpacking. And then it's also thinking about like your relationship to this baby. What is so challenging about it? Is there a goodness of fit part that we want to address in terms of that just means the temperament of this baby and the temperament of you? See a lot of active and fussy babies that, just like a little sassier to get their wants and needs met, and maybe like a mom that isn't as reactive emotionally. And so like that goodness of fit makes it hard. It doesn't mean it's impossible to bond. It just means there's more intention and effort needed to connect with this baby that's so different from you. So thinking about, and when you do temperament, you're thinking about different dimensions. And then also thinking about like your parenting compass in some ways, like when things just get a little chaotic, can we take a moment to think about what the bigger why is here? What brought you to doing this work? A lot of the parents I work with are super intentional. And so reconnecting back with that why, it's almost like having their own parenting mission in some way, or like their parenting creed.
Yeah.
Helps them ground themselves a little bit more. We're having a tough moment right now. We're not seeing eye to eye. This is my why. I'm gonna, bring myself back to this moment, because when we get triggered, we're being brought back to a past moment or a past situation or a string of situation. So I'm going to bring myself back to this moment. What do I need? Okay, what does this baby need in front of me? Am I in a place to give this baby that thing? If not, do I have community around me to help them while I help me?
Wow.
Wow.
Man, I want to go back in time.
Lady. Wow.
I love.
I just put the twins in the Volvo and we drove off. I
No.
was like, I guess we got this.
And if that helps, that worked, you know?
Oh no, man. We're there, but I'm glad we're having this conversation now because actually when you were talking, I had this image of, you go to these parent pickups. Sometimes there's like people in cars, there's people waiting outside. And I had this image of, man, what if we were all while we were waiting before they came out, before we got them to school, we were grounding into that creed. We're grounding. Like, how does that change the whole afternoon? So it's something that I'm definitely gonna move away from this conversation with, of like, yeah, what's the why? What am I doing here? What, So I think that's really beautiful work that you're doing.
I had a visual of like this, like an out of body zoom out kind of, where you're like you're in the moment, your kid's throwing a tantrum because there's a raisin, right? Like whatever. And just being able to like instead of having the big reaction of like, why can't you just like, or walking away or frustration, whatever that is, but just having like a full bird's eye view zoom out, being like, oh no, I'm gonna hold space for the raisin because it's
My why
my why is like way bigger than the raisin. Yeah, yeah, everything you're saying resonates so deeply and I think is going to be so powerful to parents because it is, when you are in it, it is, holy moly, it's so intense. And just being able to think about some of the concepts that you have brought up and to feel them, and also to work with a guide. I think I've tried for way too long to do things on my own and have listened to all the podcasts and thought about things until I can't add any more information. But I think working with someone and creating that community, and someone else that has the tools and can hold the space and, like you're saying, be able to see your arc in a way that maybe you can't because you're too close to it, and pull out the things that make you afraid, or be able to help you see the family systems. It is so, so valuable. And I'm so thankful for the work that you're doing.
So yeah. And on that note, if someone wanted to connect with you, find more about you, see your work, what's the best way for anyone listening to kind of take a deeper dive into what you do?
So for anyone interested in therapy with me, if you live in New York, I'm only licensed in New York. You can find me at www.ashleyrodriguezphd.com. And I also provide coaching, consulting, and digital resources for professionals doing this work as well. And so if you're interested in that, you can find me on Instagram at Pathbreak Coaching and Consulting.
Awesome. Well, you're light, and I look at this as the beginning of many more conversations because I've learned so much, and I have just a lot of other things I wanted to talk to you about and take a deeper dive into. But today, thank you so much for being here. Thanks for sharing this with our audience. Thank you. It was amazing.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much for the space and the opportunity.
All right.
Well,
all right.
Look forward to connecting soon. I actually can't wait to go edit this podcast till I get to listen to it like multiple times.
Which we do. How about you listen to her again? Okay. All right, Ashley. Till next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.